Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm, so that I will be free from pain." And God granted his request. It's a short prayer found in an obscure section of a tedious genealogy in the Old Testament book of Chronicles. Today, a modern reader might not take a second look. In today's high-tech, commercial-driven society, concerns about financial success are more important than talking about one's destiny. Crying out to God is not the most popular subject of television talk shows. Because in today's world, few people think about how God can change their destiny and help them break out of the situation they face. But that simple prayer has stood the test of time. For thousands of years, people from all walks of life have found hope and encouragement because of the audacity Jabez displayed. Today, millions of people are reading this prayer and discovering that God is big enough to change their circumstances and transform their future. This new audience is discovering what pastors, religious leaders, and Bible scholars have already known: that the gift of that simple prayer is far deeper than it seems on the surface. Thousands of years ago, the writer of the Chronicles was an Israelite of the ancient Middle East.
Well, Chronicles comes along relatively late in the Israelite Jewish writings. Actually, it's one of the last things to be included in the Hebrew Bible. And it doesn't need to retell old stories unless it has a special significance for the people who are alive then.
His task was to essentially record the nation's family tree from the beginning of time, starting with Adam.
It starts with Adam in the genealogy, but it skips all of the details until you get to David and Solomon. And all of a sudden, the story expands and you get into the heart of the thing, which is that the promises that God made to David and to Solomon way back in their day, they still apply.
It followed the royal bloodline of Israel's ancestors through the legendary 12 tribes, through the reign of King David and beyond. Scholars believe the book was written sometime before 1000 BC, during the reign of King David, when the recording of all events in the life of the nation of Israel would have been critical.
That's the whole point of Chronicles, is that David is the great king, beloved of God, that Solomon is his chosen successor, even though we know from the books of Kings that there was great strife as to who was going to succeed David. The oldest son was killed, the next son tried a palace coup, and it was only by intrigue that Solomon became king. But in the restatement of the book of Chronicles, it's very clear that Solomon and David are the beloved of God, the choice of God to sit on the throne in Jerusalem.
The early Israelite kings believed in order, establishing a written link with the communities of the past.
And the author of Chronicles has a vision, and it seems to be that we should restore the kingdom.
They understood the importance of history. At a time when war could reap devastating consequences, not repeating past mistakes became a priority. Thus, keeping an accurate record of genealogies, histories, and family lines became a life and death issue.
One of the things that the Bible does is it surprises us with its interest in people. The Bible loves people and mentions thousands of names, not just in genealogies, but in obscure places throughout the Old and New Testaments. And to me it seems to indicate that the God of heaven, as broad and as vast as he is also specifically and carefully and tenderly interested in individual human beings. But of course, in the Jewish context, it was also a record of where they came from, what tribe they were part of, and what the destiny of their tribe and the vision for their people was.
During that time, genealogies were important for another reason. Unlike today, a person of that era was recognized not just by his own accomplishments or personality, but by his family line.
You know, the genealogies are God's way of saying every person's important to me. And the inclusion of them is not just for historic reasons, but to notate the distinct attention of God to individuals. The appearance of the prayer of Jabez in the middle of this genealogy is God's way of saying, I care about people, and I'll give you an example. Because his attention was no more on Jabez than any one of the rest of them. It just doesn't tell their stories. And so every one of those people have stories. Remember the old TV series, The Naked City? There are 8 million people in the Naked City. Every one of them has a story. You know, this is one of them. There are, I don't know how many people listed in the Bible, but every one of them has a story. And the prayer of Jabez relates to us just one of them. And it's, I think, God's way of saying, I feel this thing about all of them.
For instance, it was not enough to know someone named Perez. It was more important to know that he was Perez, son of Kenaz, grandson of Jonathan. That family line established a history. The conduct and honor of your family line indicated something of your own conduct and honor. If you had scoundrels in your past, most people of that time believed you could not be trusted. And in the same way, if you had heroes in your past, chances are you had the stuff of greatness.
A number of cultures named their kids something of significance, spiritual significance, aspiration, like some of the Old Testament names meaning a judge for God or a servant of God or whatever. And so the parents express their aspirations through their children's names.
In the Old Testament book of Chronicles, the unusual prayer of the Israelite Jabez is nearly lost in a seemingly endless list of families.
The prayer of Jabez is found in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. The word chronicles means written words of history, acts, things that were perhaps left out of the books of 1st and 2nd Kings that the historians felt should be notated and written down and talked about. And so starting with Adam in chapter 1 and going through verse 9, the historian just traces the genealogy of David. Some 500 names are then listed before he comes to the man Jabez. And when he comes to the name Jabez, he stops. Because Jabez was a man out of his generation who looked to God, and God favored him.
Before there is any mention of Jabez, there are 139 verses containing families, clans, and bloodlines that date back to the first record of mankind on earth. After the short mention of Jabez, there are approximately 261 verses continuing that record. So it's easy to see the way that a simple and brief mention of this obscure man could be overlooked.
I think as the Bible's inspired by the Holy Spirit, God allowed in the middle of some generic list of characters, ancient characters, here's one person that just all of a sudden pops out because the Holy Spirit brings a revelation out of his life. I do think that God hides things in the Scriptures and we kind of discover them. Well, this has been a great discovery for people around America and now around the world.
But what exactly is this prayer? It's actually very simple. The Scriptures tell the story. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother had named him Jabez, saying, I gave birth to him in pain. Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm, so that I will be free from pain. Then the scriptures record the simple statement, and God granted his request. That's it. 66 books in the Bible, written over thousands of years, volumes of history, poetry, biography, proverbs, letters, and prophetic writings, more than 1,000 pages. But this strange prayer of the man Jabez numbers no more than 6 lines. Yet it has captured the hearts of generations, giving inspiration, hope, and the possibility of victory in the most desperate circumstances. Simply put, this short prayer has changed lives.
But I think that there's a revelation on it, the concept of how this man, in the day-to-day routine of one generation following another, same old, my grandfather was this, my father was that, all of a sudden, here's this guy who stands out as an unusual man of faith who did incredible things, apparently, in his generation, and came out of some pretty bad background to say, look, I want to break some of this dysfunction, and I want to be different. And God apparently granted him his request. Pretty cool story.
But other sections of the Bible are long, extensive, and more complete. They detail critical moments in the history of God's people and the doctrinal and theological issues that are infinitely more important. So what exactly is the power of this unusual prayer? And why has it fascinated and engaged millions of readers throughout history? First, it's important to remember that Jabez was named because of his mother's terrible experience at birth. At that time, within his culture, a name was significant, and it marked you for life.
Names in the Bible, of course, are significant. They almost always reflect either something about the birth or a person's destiny.
Some names of the period could be translated into heroic, honorable names. They conferred greatness and bestowed honor, beauty, and dependability.
In our own family, we have 6 children, and we didn't name them after the most recent soap opera star. We named them names that were meaningful. We wanted our oldest son to make his mark on the world for Christ, so we named him Christian Mark, for example. And Jabez's mother, because he was born in pain, wanted to express not only her experience, but wanted, I think, implicitly for her son to rise above the pain of the childbirth, to become something significant. And he apparently caught that environment, caught that notion, that aspiration, and in his own relationship with God expressed it in his own desire to rise above the mediocre and aspire to something significant.
But in this case, the name Jabez was translated as pain.
Well, and it's part of the wordplay. And it's why he asks God to preserve him from pain, preserve him from this thing that is what his name is all about. Preserve me from this.
This young man lived under the burden of a name that anyone would have hated.
This young man, when he came to age, obviously determined, I do not want to live up to that name. I don't want to be like my ancestors. I don't care what my mama called me. I want some kind of a dynamic encounter with God that changes my life. And he had the foresight to be able to go to God and say, Lord, I want you to change some of my roots and heritage and some of those things that would hold me back. I don't want to be that way. I want to change. I do not want you to allow me to go that way. I want to go a different way. This guy had great faith. And he steps out, reaches out, and I believe God responds to that. And what a dynamic message that is to anybody in any kind of circumstance, with any kind of background, who could reach out, touch God, and say, change me.
He wasn't called hero, or great, or noble, or even pretty nice. The name average could even be tolerated. But pain, it was a name which his mother and father would call him, his friends would call him, and his enemies would taunt and ridicule him.
There's a tremendous statement made in his revocation of this prophecy. He says, "This will not be self-fulfilling by me. I'm going to let God fulfill his destiny for me, not the apparent destiny as it was perceived in my inception."
At that time, it was customary for someone to literally become his name. That simply means that you stepped into the role of your family line and followed the path your family name indicated. Perhaps you became a warrior, a farmer, a servant, or a scribe. Either way, you took it upon yourself to play the role your bloodline dictated, and to change was simply not done.
Well, it almost fates him in an ancient world view. It almost fates him to be a person of pain. And part of his prayer is to say, God, save me from this fate. And God does.
But apparently, the scriptures indicate something different happened in the case of Jabez.
I mean, there is an etiology here, which is a story which gives the origin of a place name or a person's name. He's named Jabez, which in Hebrew is Yud Ayin Bet Tzadi, because he was born Be'etzev, which is Ayin Tzadi Bet. The last two letters are reversed. So one traditional commentator points out that his name is reversed because even though he was born in pain, his mother projected that there should be a reversal of fortune in his life because his name is switched around. Jabez is not Etzev.
Instead of bowing to the name pain and spending his life being humiliated, reviled, and laughed at, Jabez decided to take a remarkable step and attempt to change his destiny.
The Bible is not devoid of concepts on destiny or future or plans. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul talks about forgetting what's behind and pressing on toward the prize, the goal. The vision and visionaries are threaded throughout the pages of the Scriptures. And this little guy, an almost forgotten guy named Jabez, apparently captured some of the heart of God with his vision to rise above his humble beginnings and become something, make something of himself, or better yet, make God make something of himself. And that's, I think, is part of what sets him apart.
He did it by crying out to God, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory."
The greatest narrative of God's involvement in history is the story of Egypt. And it's not until the Israelites cry out to God that God says, okay, they're ready to be redeemed. And it's not until they sacrifice that lamb and gather its blood and put it on the doorpost that God brings the 10th plague. And it's not until they take every step along the way, they have to take the initiative to their own redemption. And then God responds.
First, Jabez asked for a blessing. He needed the kind of blessing that would break the curse of his life that began the day he was born. It was the kind of blessing that would change his circumstances and literally transform his life.
And God really does want to bless us. And as long as we realize that blessings are not just for us, they're so that we might in turn bless others. You know, the old saying is that the Dead Sea is the Dead Sea because it takes and doesn't give, as opposed to the Sea of Galilee, which is a living sea because it takes and gives. I think that's how the prayer of Jabez has to be used. I think it has to be looked at in a way that I'm going to receive with the intention of being able to bless others, not just to bask in my own blessings.
It would change the way everyone looked at him, dealt with him, and understood him. In short, it would change everything.
As pertains to the righteousness of asking God to bless us, what else do we do when we say bless our food every time? Is this meaningless exercise? Do we mean bless the food and it has nothing to do with its impact on me? I thank him for it. I ask him to bless it because I need God's blessing on my life. And the self-invocation of blessing is not self-centeredness. It's an expression of our dependence upon God. I don't have anything to offer if I'm not blessed by God.
Then he asked God to enlarge his territory. That may not seem like such an important prayer today, but at the time of Jabez, land was everything. Wars were started because of a desire for land. Lives were destroyed and nations annihilated, because land and property were the currency of that age.
I think the enlarging of your territory was something that was designated to the people of Israel when they went into the Promised Land. They each had a chunk. And I think you each have a piece. You have your own giftings. You have your own calling, your own grace on your life. And I think the only thing you really can pray is, Lord, enlarge what you have destined for me and given to me. Enlarge that. I'm not comparing myself to my brothers or my uncle or my grandfather or whatever. I just want my portion. But I want all the portion that you destined for me and everything I can get. I don't want to scrimp on it. I don't want it cut back. I don't want a miniature version. I want the expanded, full, amplified version of everything that God has for me. I think that's what that young man wanted.
Jabez knew that if he had to change his life, he needed something real, not just an emotional change, but a real, practical change that would allow him the freedom to pursue his dreams.
In ministry, or in the case of living our lives for God, when we say, Lord, enlarge my territory, we're saying, Lord, enlarge my sphere of influence, or the opportunity I have to be a blessing to other people.
But there is more to enlarging your territory than just physical land. It also has to do with seeing on a bigger scale.
The prayer for the enlargement of territory, I believe, is a prayer to possess the dimensions of God's view of the person's destiny, as opposed to our self-imposed limitations or self-perceived limitations or circumstantially imposed limitations. Circumstances, it's our own view of ourselves, or things that have happened. Any one of those things can cause the strictures and the structures around us to begin to close in. Jabez is saying, Lord, stretch it beyond that to what would be your purpose for me. I don't think he's convincing God of something big to do for him. I think he's opening to the bigness that God always had in mind for him.
His next step was to ask that God's hand be with him. Today, few people would see this as important.
I think if God really answers the first couple parts of your prayer, in other words, bless me indeed, not just a little blessing, I mean indeed with big blessings, and then enlarge me. If that really happens, I think people will literally be begging for God's hand to be upon them, because their blessings will almost overtake them and overwhelm them to where they'll need the power of God to even handle it.
In today's society, money, fame, and celebrity are the priorities.
Probably a common American misunderstanding of the prayer of Jabez is they think that when he prays for this blessing, they translate that into houses, cars, jobs, status, whatever else. And I believe deeply that that was not in Jabez's mind at all. He had a really deep understanding of the foundational and the superficial. Most Americans, I think, don't. So we will give our lives for things that don't mean anything and ignore things that mean everything. In the process, we end up missing life, or living life with a small L rather than a capital L. Jabez, when he prayed that prayer, it was obvious that he wanted the God of heaven to bring blessing and fulfillment and the completion of his aspirations and hopes and dreams on God's terms.
Not many people give a great deal of thought to the eternal questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Is there a God? Does he have a plan for my life? What is my eternal destiny? Sadly, They are questions not asked much today, but during the time of Jabez, they were questions with life or death implications.
Well, what is there that you could ask for from God that would be too bold? There might be something implicit there. There's nothing too bold to ask from God.
The culture of the desert nation of Israel was one where God was at the center. The Hebrew God called Jehovah, or Yahweh, was the focal point of every moment of every life. His relationship to his people was the center point of everyday living, and it was a culture created in service to him.
But that there wasn't anything that you could approach God with if you came with that humbled, contrite spirit that placed yourself in humble service of God. That in fact opened up every horizon to you, every possibility in terms of what God would do for you.
After all, this remarkable God had delivered his people from slavery, protected them during a 40-year journey in a barren wilderness, and led them to a place of respect, safety, and purpose.
All throughout the Bible, the word of the hand of God is upon them, or the hand of the Lord is present with them, is evident where there are things occurring that no human hand could achieve. So he says, let the hand of the Lord be with me, is basically saying, I'm asking you to achieve what I believe you want to do, and that I'm inviting you to do, and I know I can't do.
Jabez understood his people's history and therefore understood their God. He knew that if God's hand was with him, he could accomplish anything. But without that divine touch, his life was destined for obscurity.
Then he prayed, let your hand be with me. It's literally saying, within myself, I'm only capable of this much. But God, if your hand is on me, every effort that I make will be increased. It'll be enlarged. It'll be greater. And so, Lord, I want your hand to be upon me in all that I undertake to do.
Next, Jabez asked that he be kept free from harm so he would experience no pain.
I think that's a critical part of the prayer, because if God really blesses us indeed, I like that indeed part, and he enlarges us, his hand is upon us, very often, frequently, it's easy to get our eyes off of the blessor and onto the blessing, and then we begin to forget who blessed us.
Well, there's actually another line in there before that comes from the King James and the NIV. It says, keep me from evil, which is real important when you understand that once God gives blessings and he begins to enlarge our territory, it's real easy for us to become self-sufficient and think that we did something to deserve what God's done for us, and we didn't deserve it at all. And so when we say, Lord, keep me from evil, we're saying, Lord, let me keep perspective here. Let me realize that if I'm going to enjoy your blessings for a long term, keep me from doing wrong. May I keep my eyes on you, Lord, and may I trust you, and may I follow you.
And I think it's critical that when God really begins to move in our lives in that kind of, I'd like to use the word supernatural way, I think it's important to say, God, after I have all this, don't let me mess up. It's almost like it'd be better not to have it than to have it and mess up, because then you end up causing harm. It's like Jabez is saying, man, my life began in pain. Now, God, when you deliver me from this and I begin to make a difference in my own life and others, don't let me end back in pain again.
Chances are, with a name like Pain, Jabez understood the ache, the hurting, and the devastation that brokenness and injury could cause. At that time in history, accidents and injuries were an everyday part of living. Some of the oldest mummies discovered have extensive evidence of broken bones and other injuries that, while relatively simple today, would cause crippling or death during this time in history. Sanitation was unknown, safety was rare, and injuries and disease were prevalent. Even though God had given his people extensive laws governing sanitation and cleanliness, injuries due to accidents, war, and other incidents were commonplace. So the prayer of Jabez covered 4 simple areas: bless me, Enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me. Keep me from harm. That short prayer, without fancy words, intellectual debate, or diplomatic phrases, was a straightforward cry from a man in desperate pain.
Jabez was afraid that his role was pain. And he asked for release from pain. He asked for extended borders. He asked for God's favor. And because he was the best among his brothers, and we have to presume with the chronicler's theology that he was a person who approached God with a penitent and a humble heart, that God was inclined to hear his prayer.
It was a request from someone who had taken the blows of a difficult life and needed hope.
I believe that Jabez is a perfect example that it's never too late. God always can work a miracle in your life, and therefore don't ever quit, don't give up.
Perhaps the most remarkable line in the passage is the closing. And God granted his request.
This isn't some magic lantern. This isn't, you rub the lantern and you get 3 wishes no matter what kind of person you are. I believe with all my heart that it was the honorable nature of Jabez. He was a respectable, he was a moral, he was a righteous, he was a God-fearing, he was a God-obeying man. And as a result, God likes to bless people like that. But if you abuse me and ignore me and spit on me and then come around and ask a favor, it probably doesn't happen.
Something in this very average person touched the God of the universe. In a world where everyone became what was expected and lived out their predetermined path, one man had the courage to take a different road.
I would hope that it didn't become, for some people, as I'm afraid it does in some of the popular literature, a magic right, a way of controlling God. That if I say things just the way he did, that everything's going to come my way. I would hope it would not be that. I would hope that it would, however, inspire people's confidence that, first of all, the Lord God hears his people. I would hope that it would inspire them to confident prayer. We've been invited throughout all of the scriptures, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, to pray with confidence and to ask for whatever we wanted from God, and to do so with the understanding that he is not the kind that would give us stones in the midst of our need, but that he would, in fact, give us what in truly fact we needed.
Today we live in a world where words like destiny are used but rarely understood. Even after thousands of years, we still live in the same circumstance as this man Jabez. Certainly, our lives are different, but our dreams are not so different at all. Somewhere at the core of our being, we long to discover our own destiny, our place in the universe.
When we discuss destiny, we're always dealing within the tension of what is our present circumstance as it appears to be and what has been ordained for us by our loving Father. I believe uniformly the grace, the purpose of God for every human experience far outreaches in its boundaries whatever we would experience on our own.
Perhaps we too are burdened by circumstances. A dead-end job, a difficult family situation, an unwanted child, or even a struggle with addiction.
I think that breeds faith into the heart of any struggling person, any person on the street, any little mama someplace trying to raise her kids, any young single who's, bound up by some stuff from the world. Man, there's hope. You can get out of your dysfunction and into God's function and find it and find great fulfillment. Power of prayer, simple, faith-filled prayer can change a person's life.
Not all of us live in the throes of despair, where drugs, gangs, or hopelessness live outside our doorstep, ready at any moment to destroy us.
And I think that the most frightening dimension of life isn't when financial reverses come, or it's not when circumstances don't go well, or careers, tank, or whatever. The most frightening circumstance for me is the evidence of the loss of hope. Even in marriage counseling, which I've done some over the years, I look for what I call the death of effort. The death of effort indicates there's a death of hope. And I think that in the prayer of Jabez, we have this wonderful expression. There is hope. Doesn't matter where I came from, who I am, who I'm not. With God, there's hope. Whenever God's alive and the two of us are together, he and I are a majority and we can handle everything. Bring it on.
And when I pray this prayer, I say, Lord, would you bless me indeed? I mean, really bless me. And then would you enlarge my territory? Would you give me opportunities today that I don't have any clue that you're going to give me? Give me opportunities of influence. Give me opportunities to enjoy your blessings. And then, Lord, uphold my hand. Support me. Guide me. And keep me from doing wrong. Don't let me fall into the trap of self-sufficiency or temptation. And then, Lord, let me be a blessing to other people.
Most of us live, as Henry David Thoreau said, lives of quiet desperation. Our marriage didn't work out the way we had hoped. Our career isn't what we thought. And one by one, our dreams have begun to die.
The Bible says without faith it's impossible to please God. But if you come to God and you believe that he is, that he's a now God, and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him, man, you can have anything you want. Anything you ask, if you believe for it, you can have it within the parameters of the will of God. And this guy asks huge, largely, but within the parameters of what he knows God would want him to have, and God grants him his request.
But even in our most desperate circumstances, there is a quiet voice that whispers across the centuries.
With God, everything's possible. And the word impossible is not in the vocabulary of a person who really is in touch with God, and it wasn't in the vocabulary of Jabez. He believed in his heart that if God would answer his prayer, he could be something significant, and we're talking about him thousands of years later. What more do we have to say?
It's the voice of a man who understood the key to changing his destiny.
You know, in every generation, there are men and women who rise up out of obscurity. I mean, they get God's attention. And God turns his favor towards them because he has something for them in their life in order to impact his kingdom upon the earth.
The remarkable news is the unusual path he took is still available to us today.
Let me say to seniors, as I've come into my senior years, don't ever get the notion that there's going to be a downturn. Our bodies, they wear and they tear and gravity takes over, you know. But there is a brighter and brighter destiny that isn't just eternal beyond this life, it's in this life. And so it is for all of our lives.
The God who changed the destiny of an obscure man in the middle of the desert thousands of years ago is still the God who can change our destiny as well.
Because this is ultimately a partnership. We're not passive vessels. God didn't create us just, to play games with us. God created us and then gave us a challenge. God calls to us and expects us to respond to that call. And if we don't, we're responsible for that, not God.
Millions of people over the centuries have read the prayer, and it's changed countless lives.
God's program is ever on the increase. Now that increase has to do with not necessarily the statistical measurements we're accustomed to, it's necessarily cash in the bank or some balance, but an increase of joy, of his purpose, of influence, of touching others, of being a tool in his hand to make a difference in this world for good and for God and for glory.
Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm so that I will be free from pain." And God granted his request.
It's a prayer. Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, to the God of Abraham and Isaac. Jabez cried out to the God of
Israel, to the God of Abraham and Isaac. He didn't say much,
but he prayed enough.
Changed his destiny. Forever.
Oh, that you would bless me. That's what he said. That's what he said. And expand my borders. Keep my hand from evil, that I might see your goodness. That I might see your goodness. Let your hand be with me. Everywhere I go. Oh Lord. Prosper me. Prosper me. Jabez cried out. Help me sing it.
To the God of Israel.
Help me sing it.
To the God of Abraham and Isaac.
I didn't pray much.
He didn't say much.
But he prayed enough.
Changed his destiny forever.
What did he say? Oh, that you would bless me and expand my borders. Keep my hand from evil, that I might see your goodness. Let your hand be with me everywhere I go. For the city, prosper me. Everybody sing prosper, prosper me. Believe it everywhere I go. Everywhere my soul turns, prosper me. Prosper me. Everywhere I go. Everywhere my soul turns.